formal beginning. So it's 10:18, and let's start. We don't have a quorum, we don't think. Who's on the phone, please?
Betty Anthony, Donna Cooper, Kirsten Williams,
Chuck Sully.
Oh, okay. So we do. Great, I think. And Vicki Corman and
Sandra Madabu Fry
are here as board members.
John
And
Misrock was also on the call a minute ago.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
okay, great.
So, Madam Chair, I believe you have a quorum.
I believe we do. And we also have our ex officio.
I'm Tommy Wells, and also at the table with us is our esteemed General Counsel, or
Assistant General Counsel.
Nice promotion.
and our Director of Energy,
Teresa Lawrence.
and our Assistant General Director of Energy,
Lance Loke.
and then our Director of the CEO.
I'm Ted Treview. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy fall.
Yes.
Not
Happy
until
fall.
4 o'clock.
2 p.m.
Happy New Year. It's Rosh Hashanah.
Happy New Year.
As you can see, I am not in services. Oh, well, I'm going to get struck down. And I really, this would have been a good year to be observant because Ruth Bader Ginsburg was at the 6th and 9th.
Oh.
Sorry, I missed that. Okay, so we just did, I think, roll call and introductions, and let's go to approving the agenda. Does anybody have any comments on the agenda?
Hi, Vicki. This is Kirsten. Are we going to have any discussion about the report?
Which report are you talking
I'm
about?
sorry. That's an excellent point about the annual report to the commission.
Oh, to the council.
The one that we're working on. Yes, we are.
The one that we're working on.
Yes.
Okay.
You may not have the benefit of an agenda in front of you, but it is on our agenda.
No, I saw it, and I didn't. I am looking at the things that Lenore submitted, and I didn't specifically see that as an item, and it may just be that I'm not familiar with the language of the title, so that's fine. I had a couple of questions for my section for the board.
Okay, great. Yes, and we'll take that up after a couple of other issues that we're going to go through.
Sure.
Um,
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions or comments regarding the agenda? Okay, hearing none. Would somebody like to move for approval of the agenda?
I move for approval of the agenda.
Thank you. Would someone like to second?
I'll second.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, John.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, hearing none. Agenda is approved. Thank you. How about comments on the minutes, which I will confess, I could be relying on other board members because I have not looked at them yet. Anybody else? Okay, do folks want to just take a second and take a look? They're long, they're good. I'm sure they're good. All of the minutes are much improved. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. They're very helpful. These will be helpful to us as we go into our next round of drafting. Anyone else? Or do you guys want to take a moment and look at them and maybe we'll send them in if we have comments?
Doesn't sit appear that many people have thoroughly reviewed it.
No. All right, I'm going to recommend maybe that we all just take a moment to look at them. And then we can approve them at the next meeting. Is that all right with people? Does that require a motion? All right.
The actions to approve them.
Okay. Actions to postpone never require anything official. Okay. Update on the expenditures.
Good morning, folks, again. We included in your package and in the Dropbox a breakdown of the DCSCU FY16 expenditures. A similar breakdown was included in the audit report, but it was more in a aggregated form which shows the total across the categories. We decided to provide you with a month-by-month breakdown of the spending for FY16. And also we wanted to segregate DCSU spending from REDF funds so that you have a clearer picture of what they spend from the SETF versus REDF and then the total
Lance, for our
expenditures.
new members, do you want to quickly explain RDF versus SETF?
Yes, the Sustainable Energy Trust Fund, SETF, is the primary source of funding for the DCSU contract. That is the annual $20 million that the DCSU uses to do their program implementation work. REDF is the Renewable Energy Development Fund. DOEE also manages REDF funds, which we use primarily for solar installation and expanding solar in the district. In fiscal year 2016, the DCSU implemented 2 solar programs on behalf of DDOE. One was a small business solar pilot program, and the other was an affordable solar program for low-income folks. We put together a budget. The total amount for those 2 programs was $2.4 million, but the DCSU did not expend all of those funds to be able to hit the required targets for the program. For example, the target for the low-income program for solar was 140 homes. The SU completed 158 homes. On the smaller business side, they completed 13 installations, and well above the expected capacity that the agency had provided funding for. Some of the contractors were able to leverage their SRECs to be able to install additional capacity on the small businesses. So we took the liberty of breaking out those expenditures for those 2 programs because it's not an annual or necessary part of the DCSU spending year over year.
But it is something in which the SEU has a role.
Yes, they had a role last fiscal year in implementing those programs. Currently, for example, in FY17, we did not provide any RDF funds to the SEU.
So they will not have a role in FY17, is that what you're saying?
Well, it's right, not in FY17. Doesn't mean they're precluded from being a bidder for the services that we put out to for grants and such. But for FY17, they're not part of any REDF program, are they?
No, but there is a separate benchmark renewables in the SU contract through the SETF. So it's clear they would still need to do renewables, but not funded by the REDF.
That's correct. What Hussein is saying is that within our $20 million allocation from the Sustainable Energy Trust Fund, our new benchmark, which started on April 5th, is that we install a megawatt a year with the Sustainable Energy Trust Fund money, not with any money from the Renewable Energy Development.
Solar?
Yes, a megawatt a year solar. So we have not used any REDF money in FY17. We have used only Sustainable Energy Trust Fund money to do the solar programming we've done this year. We've not, and just to be more clear, to clarify that even further, we've not done any low-income solar this year.
That was my next question. What type of solar installation?
This has been large commercial.
So do you know yet whether you will be doing low-income solar installation?
There are about 10 days left in this fiscal year, and we will
Okay.
not be doing low-income solar this year.
Okay.
And I would also say that the amount of low-income solar is being done through the REDF. They're required to almost all of it to be low-income.
The 10 grantees who got 13 million plus to do low-income solar.
So the void created should be addressed by the solar
No
board.
void. There's no void. We're going to be doing more low-income solar than ever been done in the city. It's the largest low-income solar
Well, that's what I'm saying.
deployment in
So
the
that
country.
void is the wrong word. The difference between what was done previously by the SEU
Right.
will be more than compensated or
Yes.
will be done under the Solar for All program.
Yes.
Right. I mean, just as a matter of scale, Madam People's Counsel, I think as Lance has put together in this chart here, from the Renewable Energy Development Fund in FY16, we spent a little over $2 million. And I think Director Wells is saying the agency has recently put over $13 million worth of money into low-income solar deployment, so that you'll see a significant ramp up in that space.
I'm sorry, what does that do to the SEU benchmark, with regard to low income?
The SU doesn't have a specific benchmark to do low income solar. It has the benchmark to do solar.
But she.
Could I ask a clarification question?
Sure.
My recollection in the original contract, 5, 6 years ago, was that the SEU didn't have a specific mission vis-a-vis installing solar. Am I incorrect, or is am I mistaken?
Well, they had a benchmark for renewables,
For renewables, right?
which was solar.
And it was only solar in the original contract?
Yeah, I mean, in DC, it's basically solar.
It was just de facto solar, not limited
Yeah, I
specific.
mean, John, we weren't doing any wind or anything like that in the first 5 years of the contract.
Doesn't
It was all solar, but we did have a benchmark related to renewables. And there was not an installed capacity goal. It was a goal of reducing the cost per watt that we were paying year over year by at least 10% a year. So that's the way the goal was articulated for the first 5 years of the contract, from 2012 through the end of 2016.
But with regard to low income, wasn't there a spend requirement for low income housing that was then converted into, not the benchmark not being based upon the spend itself, but upon it
Yes.
being incorporated into other programs or measures that would result in low income users relying more upon renewable
Well,
energy?
no, the
Not quite.
new benchmark is the SU has to spend 20% of its budget on low income programs, and it has to achieve at least 10% of its overall savings from low income programs.
But it doesn't specify what those programs will be.
No, that's up
And
to
they
the
do
SU.
not have to include, and are unlikely to include, a low-income solar. Is that
Yeah,
a fair
they're
statement?
not. Yes.
But versus for the first 5 years of the contract,
Got it.
we had a benchmark of spending 30% of our funds in the low income segment. It didn't say whether those had to be,
Got it.
single family housing, multifamily housing, or whatever, just 30% of the funds had to be spent in that community, in the low income community.
And
Which
that
was
was
again
one of the-
changed when the new contract.
Yeah, that was one of the recommendations of the
Yeah.
board, that you
Yeah.
add a savings goal along with this, not just a spend goal.
Right.
Right.
But all I'm getting at is with now an overlap of a great deal of an expenditure being under a different program that isn't done by the SEU, how does that interact with the SEU benchmark, which are completely overlaps in purpose?
Yeah, so right now the basic interaction would be just any type of strategic coordination that the SU might offer to the grantees. But we're essentially going on two different paths where the grantees will have their targeted number of installations and the DCSU has their target number of installations, capacity that they need to install. So the overall result will be more solar being done. I think the SEU made a strategic decision not to do low-income solar this year, given the amount of grants that we have on the street for low-income solar. And they're serving the other market segments, such as the large commercial, which these grants are not currently addressing.
But the SEU's low income expenditures and savings will be in other programs.
Yes,
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Clear on that? Thank you.
You're correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so also FY17, we provided a year-to-date update. Thus far, the CSU has invoiced a total of $14.3 million, which leaves just, I would say, a little about $4.7 million left to be expended in the month of September. Again, I do want to remind the board and the folks in the room that it's not a necessary condition for the SU to spend all of their funds in any given fiscal year, given the way the contract is now structured. But this spreadsheet provides a breakdown of the spending by categories to date.
So now walk me through this. So the total to date is $14 million?
Yes, that's how much they've invoiced us, including the month of August, which we just received day before yesterday.
Okay. So it looks like they will come very close to spending $20 million.
Yeah, I think the plan is from the SEU standpoint is to get to the 20 million. It's my understanding that we'll see a pretty hefty bill for the month of September to account for the remaining funds, so to speak.
That's about 5 point something million.
Well, it's about 4.7 because out of the difference, we also have to reserve that 820,000 for performance incentive.
And you expect the bulk of what will come in still to be contract, third-party oriented expenditures?
That'll work for the SEU.
Marcus, I'll let you talk to that, but I would say the vast majority of it.
Yeah, financial incentives for our large commercial projects. We have a number of direct install projects that subcontractors do for lighting projects and some boiler swap outs as well.
Okay. Because I'm assuming that consistent with prior patterns, the contract and all the groundwork take quite a bit of time and then that bucket split. So that's what we'll see some incentives distributed. Okay. Thank you. And we had talked before, we shouldn't go into it again because we spent a lot of time on it, but about our having the opportunity to have a separate discussion on the breakdown between what we were calling internal and external and basic expenditures. I don't remember what dates we ended up talking about.
We had agreed to do that sometime after October 14th when we completed the annual report. Also, we included in the package, and forgive us for the small print, some basic descriptions that we received from the SEU on each of the various categories of spending. And also we provided you with the project codes that corresponds with some of the invoice billing. These two sheets will be further explained when we do the deep dive on the invoices, so that you'll be able to see exactly how DOE tracks the spending and do our review of the invoice. But these descriptions will help you understand when we talk about, materials or incentives or even subcontractor spending, how it's defined from the standpoint of the DCSU.
Okay. Thank you. Did we set up a date for our deep dive, or did we talk about that?
No, we haven't set up a date. I think that's one of the items on the agenda today, is to really set some dates for the next fiscal year, of when we'll have our meetings and when we want to do the deep dive.
Great. Okay, thank you. Does anybody have anything else on the expenditures issues? Okay, let's move to the responses to the Washington City Paper article.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, we appreciate the opportunity to talk about this, and I really only want to make about 3 points in terms of our response to the City Paper article. I think that there are 3 major points that we should make here. One is about the claim that the goals weren't met, and we need to talk about what the goals were. There was a statement about some statements that I made at 3 minutes and 55 minutes, and 3 hours and 55 minutes into the hearing, and at 4 hours and something into the hearing. We'll talk about those. And then there is an issue of the ACEEE rankings, and finally then a discussion about the solar within the article. Let me start with the first point, which is the statement in the article about the 50% renewable energy target. And I think this really dovetails into the discussion we just had a couple of minutes ago about truly understanding. This is a reporter who is writing about what our achievements were through the end of FY16, because all of our work that's been done in FY17 hasn't been, we haven't claimed any savings for it yet, nor has it been verified. But through FY16, the reporter talks about the city has a goal of 50% renewable energy target by 2032. And that is accurate. However, as we just said, when our goals were set up for the contract that started in March of 2011 and went through April of this year, this 50%, our goals were set up in about 2010. And our goals remained constant from 2010 through April 5th of this year. this goal of a 50% renewable energy target was set up by the administration here at some point, probably, what, 3 or 4 years ago?
Yeah, it's in 2013, it came out in the Sustainable DC Plan.
There was never a discussion of saying the SEU's new solar goal would be the sustainable energy goal that was set up for 50%. That was not our goal. The reporter is mistakenly saying that the SEU's goal was the city's goal. We are a contributor to the city's work, clearly, but this 50% goal was never our goal. So the premise of the article kind of gets started on the wrong foot, so to speak, to say that we failed to hit our goals. Again, you've seen our verified results every year, and you know what our goals were. In fact, we've never had an installed capacity goal up until April 5th of this year when the new contract went into effect. We had a reduction of cost year-over-year goal that I think is Mr. Mizrock asked about earlier. So there was never a goal of what the SEU has to install, a megawatt a year like we do now or something like that. That was never our goal. So to say that we failed to hit our goals, I just think is just unfortunately
Where exactly in the article do you remember he said the goals?
the first line or two.
But does he specifically
Second paragraph.
Second paragraph.
Yeah.
That was uncertain whether or not he was specific to your goals or whether he was talking about the benchmarks and minimum and maximum.
Yeah. No. That's, to my understanding, not what he's talking about at all.
But go ahead.
The second part about the statement about the energy savings, I flat out admit here, I made a misstatement at the hearing. I've apologized to Councilmember Che for confusing a cumulative goal versus an annual goal. What I cited was a cumulative number that we had achieved, not the annual number that we had achieved. I apologize to this board as well as I make this statement today, but I do admit I made a mistake at the hearing. That was not something that was done with the intent of misleading anybody or misdirecting anything. I simply made a mistake there in confusing two numbers. The third issue about the 1% energy savings goal. Again, I think it's important to note here, when our goals were set up in roughly around 2010, we used 2009 energy consumption data as our baseline. And that baseline never changed over the 5 years or so under which we operated what I call the old contract. And so our numbers every year were to hit a certain amount of energy reductions based on the 2009 baseline. Those numbers are reviewed by the EM&V reporters, the evaluation and verification team every year, Tetra Tech, who's come in and reported to you. And we've performed very well against those numbers. I don't think there's been any debate there. We've over the last 3 years at least, exceeded the minimum targets that we've had to achieve. I think and the performance has been much stronger in the last 2 years. But that was always the baseline. It never changed. And let me move on to this ACEEE ranking here, which is, again, it says it was the DCSEU's rank. The ACEEE ranking is a city ranking. It talks about a lot more than just how energy efficiency programs are ranked. The ACEEE rankings have mentioned the DCSEU as a best practice a couple of years in a row, but at the time when I made the statement that the city's ranking was number 3, that was accurate. It is correct that 2 weeks later, the rankings changed and the city went from number 3 to number 8, but I had no knowledge that the city's rankings were going to change, and I could not have made a statement even if I had known that those rankings would have been embargoed. So at the time when I made the statement that the city was ranked number 3, that was simply, it was accurate. And finally, there's the discussion in the article about what was paid per watt for the systems that were delivered in FY16, both the low-income systems and the small commercial systems. We went through a discussion with Dr. Lawrence, Dr. Long, and others here within the OEE to agree upon a price per watt that would be paid for the systems. The article starts off by saying that we spent $2.4 million for the systems, and I think Dr. Long explained to you, yes, that was the allocation of money that was put on our purchase order that we could have spent. We did not spend all of that money. We could only spend as much money, quite frankly, as we had time for. This program operated for less than 5 months. So we spent, a little over $2 million. So, not fully understanding how the reporter maybe got to his math, he's using an improper numerator for his calculation of how much we spent on it, and therefore, I guess, trying to derive a per watt price based upon a flawed calculation. The beginning of the calculation is wrong because we didn't spend $2.4 million on the program. Yes, that was the allocation. We could have spent up to that much, but we only spent a little over $2 million on the program, and all of our invoices were submitted to the department here. We spent $2.70 a watt, which was the agreed upon price. For the low income systems, I think we spent $2.30 a watt. For the small commercial systems, $2.20 a watt for the small commercial systems, and those numbers have been fully reviewed and vetted by the staff here, and those are simply the facts.
So its math is wrong.
The math is wrong. And if I can answer any other questions about the article, I'd be happy to do so.
If I could just make a quick point here. That I understand and, completely what you're saying about his misstatements in the article and his lack of understanding, basically, of what the SCU does and its role. I guess the question I have is this article a one-time thing? It strikes me there was an article, about 6 months ago, about the contract award.
By the same author.
And I just wonder if you have a sense, whether one, this is going to be an ongoing thing, and two, whether there's a way to sort of better articulate what exactly SCU is doing, and perhaps preparing in advance as opposed to after the fact.
John, thanks for the question. I think the way we look at this is probably the fourth article of some sort of discussion about the SCU and its activities by this particular journalist. There was one, you're correct, about 6 months ago. That may have been the first one. There have been two since then, and then this one that came out a few weeks back. Trying, as I think you soundly suggested, to get ahead of this a little bit this time. We worked with the department here. We knew that he was writing something, not specifically what, but we knew he was writing something, and so we gave him some information about, our view of what we had done over the summer and last summer, not this summer, and how our operations are functioning well. And I think you see the quote that he put in there for. We gave him a written. He talked to one of our public relations managers and essentially laid out 3 issues. They didn't ask any questions, but he laid out 3 issues, and we gave him written responses to those issues. To the latter part of your question about whether he will write about this again, I think is one that I'm not in the best position to answer.
Well, then I'll answer that. I've known this reporter and he was with the Washington Times for a number of years, where he does in-depth articles against, the government, or to try to uncover wrongdoing in the government and government officials. And I think that's a very strong, good role for any, city. You need to have the accountability. I expect that he is going to do an article on our solar deployment. He may give the SEU a break, but I know that it's been very interesting in this job to understand the contractors, the people that are involved in this work, those that bid on this work that sometimes don't get it or do get it, and the constant refrain, what I have to parse through is generally you're doing it wrong. And however you do it, I mean, you should do rebates, or you shouldn't, be teeing up these deep retrofits because we think there's more low-hanging fruit. If you just gave us the money, we could do it. Or if you just removed the risk in the private sector and let the public sector take the risk. Let me say that overall, I think that the city is, clearly we're the first LEED Platinum city in the world. We're on the right track. I think that there's a healthy role of, I don't want to criticize this reporter, and I speak to him, but I know that he'll be doing something on solar. We're putting so much money out on solar through the Renewable Energy Development Fund. Why wouldn't you do an article on how are they spending it? But I will note that some of the critics out there, that it costs more to install solar for low-income residents. Their roofs aren't ready for a 15-year investment. We have to fix them. And in some ways, it just costs more in getting getting new customers out of low income saying, no, we're here, really, it's free. And getting them to trust us. So acquisition costs more. And it's not going to be like putting solar on nice houses up northwest. It's going to cost more to install solar for low-income residents. And frankly, it costs more. Our last adopters are small businesses in DC. We put money up front to say, let's figure this out. Let's put a lot more incentive in there to see if we can't break through some of that. It's going to cost more to deploy in some of these areas. And I think, this is sophisticated stuff too. When, say, maybe Sam Brooks says, well, look, overall we see that residential use of power is going up. Well, gentrification, with all the electronics and the, houses being fully with new HVAC systems, that may be going up, but the number one consumer of power in the district are buildings, and that has gone down. So we've seen the greatest expansion, economic expansion since World War II, of new buildings going up, and power actually went down among our highest users, at 74%. So yes, residential went up. Doesn't mean that we haven't made incredible advances for the city. But if you focus just on residential, you're not looking at the biggest use of power. And we benchmark it. And so I think we're on the right track, but there will be more articles, I promise you. There's too many players in this. There's too many folks that would like things to work differently for them. And we just have to navigate it. And the last thing I'll say, it's one of the reasons we have this board, is that this board is an advisory board, but also to be able to speak to the public and speak to me, with recommendations, and to the council, that your eyes are on this, to say, okay, this is what we think. I assume, Teresa, this is true, Dr. Lawrence, I believe every time a benchmark was changed, it came through the advisory boards.
I had a
In
question
terms of
about that. Yeah.
informational, in terms of informational, it didn't require an approval.
So then maybe it wasn't every one, but some of the benchmarks that were changed, I understood, was actually requested through the advisory board.
Yes.
Well, I think that there may be some
So
benchmarks may have been
the
changed.
last thing I'll say, though, is that we have a strong advisory board. You guys are the best we got in the city. My trust is with you to advise us. And I appreciate articles. I appreciate the the peanut galleries out there, but you guys carry more weight with us than the others.
Well, if I can, I agree with Tommy. Clearly, there are going to be more articles, and I suspect, not being able to predict, that it's not just going to be limited to, loose slips. That we're going to get, media attention. This is a big issue. It's involved a lot of money. You have the political climate at the time is sensitive to those types of things, and we're very, very environmentally focused. So the eye is definitely on us. We have new programs. We have the Solar for All. People are looking, and that's going to happen. What I'd like to do is sort of to change the narrative so that we're not defensive. That you're not every saying, oh well, he said 2.4 and it was actually 2 million plus. I mean, that's not really the issue. It's fundamentally whether or not whether the SAU is meeting its goals, and whether or not the public understands that. That one obviously requires education. We talked about the SAU and having some sort of public information type of a forum so that people do understand, so that when you get an article that really doesn't grasp the technical aspects and everything that's happening, that you can address those. But in addition, in order for the board to be effective and for us to be able to even address the issues that come to us, we have to have information. And I would say that there is frequently a paucity of information beforehand, so that and I'll speak for myself, I don't know, I can't explain to someone, what actually happened. For example, even, I think this is the first time that I saw the issue of whether that the low-income benchmark was being met by providing solar for shelters and public hospitals. I didn't know that. And what does that mean? How do you decide that? That type of information should be provided to the board up front so that we know what you're doing and that we can give you some feedback as to whether or not we think that that's appropriate, from our particular perspective. So I think that there's a lot of preliminary work that needs to be done. We're moving in the direction of getting more information, and I think that that's a good thing. Sure. I think that, what DOEE is providing is helpful, but I would like to see the SCU actually provide more information to the board on a regular basis. Inform us, engage us, so that we really are advising you as opposed to an after-the-fact reaction to what you're doing or to what we read in the paper.
Right, Madam People's Counsel, if I may, and I totally support your suggestion. And if you and your team are willing to work with us and help us better understand how, we do the quarterly dives with the advisory board. We try to take a deep dive on where our programs are and what we're doing. We want to be as transparent as possible. There's, if you want further information, help us better understand where you think those information gaps may exist, so we can fill them for you. I mean, I think we talked about maybe doing a half of a day where we kind of, instead of going over okay, this is how much we spend here and there. Let's talk about the programs at a more of a top line level and talk about what they are exactly and how they're serving the city and the various communities within the city. And I think that might be beneficial to the entirety of the board.
And I was
I'm sure
it's not just
well.
the People's Council.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
the entire board.
That's what I said. The entirety of the board. We would really appreciate having the opportunity to do that.
And I guess I would just add, I don't know that there's a silver bullet or, the one answer to what is it, 'cause I think if we demonstrated, 'cause I know I've been on this issue of, what's the breakdown of the expenditures for 5 or 6 or 7 months. And I think each time we talk about it, maybe we're better able to articulate what it is that we're looking for. So we keep having a problem of the board not knowing what to ask for, and then you all not providing information because you don't know that there's a question
I don't know what the question
and it's hard to anticipate what it is we're going to want to know, nor what somebody's going to write about. So I think that we may need to go through all of these until we've figured out what are the best tools for us to be able to communicate back and forth. You know, I think this has been a 7 month, 6 or 7 month, this what the record reflects.
Right.
Pointing to the breakdown of the expenditures, and we will have the deep dive, but I know that we started the dialogue in March or after the first city paper article. So the board absolutely is, I think, fundamental in being able to explain and understand itself. So it's able to go there, and it's been hard for me to get my arms around this issue.
Sure.
And this is an issue, but there are other issues. Marshall.
Tanya, we're looking at methodology. I just wanted to make one comment as well, and I will defer to Director Wells on this also, and it corresponds with something that we talked about, and it also aligns somewhat with one of the statements that Sandra Manabou-Fry was making, which is proactive engagement, communications around what the DCSU is accomplishing. And we talked about potentially seeking an opportunity through an entity such as the Washington Post to kind of showcase that. So thinking about another major vehicle, and not just maybe specific to the DCSEU, but encompassing the DCSEU along with some of the critical things and positive things that are occurring in the District of Columbia in this respective area, and integrating that with the DCSEU as complementary to all of that, to have another voice that speaks and kind of clarifies certain aspects of this, but proactively seeking that type of an opportunity as one particular component of, beginning to get out there and get the information out there. Of course, there are a ton of other vehicles that could be utilized as well.
Yeah, could I just add to what Donna said? I agree wholeheartedly with what Sandra and Donna both said, but I think one of the things I was trying to get at in my initial question was that I see the SCU, and this was something I was going to talk to Vicki about later in terms of the report we're writing. I just see the SCU as a tool that is part of a number of tools that DOE and the DC government have to reach these bigger goals. So I think one of my observations is, I think in this article, DCSEU is pulled out and criticized for this expenditure, not accomplishing this. And then there's just this throwaway of, and the city's goals are this, by 2032, whatever the number is, as opposed to sort of describing this bigger picture, what Tommy mentioned, that we're actually moving towards this bigger vision goal of accomplishing, making DC hopefully, if not carbon free, right, certainly meeting a very rigorous standard. And so part of what I was suggesting, and I think Donna was alluding to this, is this is the bigger conversation, I think, that one would have with the public and the press and our elected officials. So, but I mean, I'm not suggesting anything specific, but I think Donna's point about, where could we identify forums just to discuss the bigger picture of what the city's goals are, what they're accomplishing, and the means by which they're doing this, which I think overall are becoming successful. But I think since we've got so many different things going on, it hasn't been explained as fully, perhaps, as it should be.
One thing, if I can, be really candid, I agree with you, Ted, that the problem is that they're dumping on you as if you are expected to meet the entire goals for this, the global goals for the city. And we need to clarify that, make certain that people understand it, and the type of forum that they're suggesting to do that. But the problem is, and one of the reasons why the focus is on you, is because it's $20 million per year of ratepayer money. Of people, this is money that people can see and know it's coming out of their pocket. The global kinds of things that are being done taxpayers, they don't see it directly. Yes, they're still paying for it. They may not get it, and that's part of the education process. But this is every time that you pick up your bill, you see this deduction. And yes, when someone says, and someone is sitting around the room, collecting a fee, it resonates.
Absolutely
And that's
fair, ma'am.
that's what has to be.
Absolutely fair.
We have to do. Have to look.
Absolutely.
And,
But
clearly,
I appreciate your first statement there, which is
that's absolutely.
we
we're
are
not
part
right,
of the city's
right,
collective efforts
right. And
to
so
hit
it
these
goes
goals. They
back
don't,
to
we understand that we are expending a lot of ratepayer resources every year, but
tangible,
yeah.
deduction from their
and we
paycheck.
and we can show them tangible results as a
Right.
result of their investment.
You know how that is.
I understand.
Sure.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning.
Sorry to interrupt.
Marshall?
If I may, Marshall, you're welcome, DOE. I just wanted to, while we're having this really great conversation about correcting the record, I wanted to correct the record on one more thing, which is Tommy correctly cited in Sam Brooks in the article, he says residential energy use is that's exactly what Sam says, and based on the metric that Sam used, that is true, but it's misleading, because that metric, residential electricity use, only reflects residents who pay their own bills directly. And as more buildings have become separately metered for electricity, that number, the percentage of total residents who pay their own bills directly as opposed to on a master meter, has also been going up. And when you normalize, instead of normalizing for the population or not normalizing at all, when you normalize for the number of residential accounts, it's flat. Residential accounts, actually.
Well, again, that's information.
And I've talked to Sam about
Well,
this.
I will say for the first time, and Ted knows we did this, because the city paper is its own little animal, we know that there's a lot of snark and trolls in the comment section, and that's part of entertainment. People like to see the snark and trolls. They won't put their own names on there,
Right.
and they'll just say nasty stuff. But for the first time, we put substantive comments in there to say, actually, this is the correct measure. And we did it twice. And we're going to continue to do that because half the fun of reading the city paper online is, who reads the comment section? The city paper? Okay. See? So that will last forever, that when someone pulls this up online in years to come, they'll see that DOEE responded with the facts. So we're catching up.
Yeah, I just want to say that I agree with Tommy's comment about the role of the press, even if it's unpleasant. It's a critical role in our society, and if they get it wrong, I was just suggesting we need to figure out how to correct it in a respectful but meaningful way.
But also, I think to honor the spirit of the commentary, which is that DC is aligned in wanting to advance green energy, energy access, and I think everybody's eager for us to do it better. So if part of it is just a frustration that a 1% reduction looks modest to begin with, when you compare it to what other jurisdictions are accomplishing, and you look at what other jurisdictions are spending, in order to accomplish that, and then you look at things like minima and maxima benchmarks that don't seem to quite be still hitting the even arguably modest targets, there's frustration there. And I think it's not a bad thing for all of us to keep our eye on the ball and say, even if we are hitting minimum benchmarks, is it enough? Could we be doing it better? And that's our purpose.
And
and
that was my point in terms of not being defensive,
Right.
but rather to look at it as, put on your whatever, and constructive criticism as to how we can make it better, so that.
I will agree, but I'll also note that the loose lips column gets a certain type of latitude that you would not find in other columns in, say, a columnist in the Post. You get to be far more personal. And I know that they've got Ted in his sights. I think the criticism of Mary Che was unfair. I think that the way it gets personalized, you wouldn't find somewhere else. It's the only thing missing from the loose lips is it used to be funny. It used to have some
That's because you
clever,
weren't the target.
no, it used to have clever snark in it. There's nothing clever anymore. I mean, that's where you got Mayor for Life and other things. I mean, Alyssa Silverman, I think, is one of the snarkiest, but funny. This guy is an in-depth, deep reporter, but he also has an editor culture that says it's okay to be more personal about it. And so it's hard. I would, I'm sometimes Ted's critic, but it's hard when you're in.
Not to be offensive.
Not to be
I've been
offensive.
in that situation, Blue Slips goes after everyone and anyone that they feel like doing. And of course, what I'm not saying, don't feel bad, don't be, but just, let's not,
did I
our
say I felt
defense
bad?
become counterproductive because we're so busy defending
Mhm.
that we don't move forward.
And that's
I
why we
think that
did
a
a comment
factual-
section. Yeah.
Your factual response
It's
is
very
excellent,
helpful.
but, and move on.
Yes.
And now having spent a lot more than our allotted time on it, let's move on. And
Thank you very much.
And thank you for
Appreciate
your
it.
response. Thank you. Anybody else have anything, or shall we move to the FEU annual report? I believe you guys are going to put it up on the screen, and those of you on the phones, I sent a hard copy, I sent an electronic copy last evening. I believe the same document is what's being put up on the screen now for us to work off of. And we might just want to hit some big items because it's a big document and it doesn't even have all of the sections in it. And I did put page number in the bottom, and it's already up to 37 pages.
For the next section.
We're not in that stuff. It's this report.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, we don't. Oh, we could. You want photos?
I love photos.
Looks like photos. You like it? Advisory board report. So, because I don't know how, if we want to do a group edit, which I think could be cumbersome, if we go line by line, or I don't know that we're ready for it. I will just say the sort of big picture here is that those of you who were going to put sections in, I would welcome you to do so. I think what we are still missing, I'll call these out, are our executive summary / vision / concepts, organizing principles. And John, I think we had your name on that, so we can figure out how to put these things together in the future. Betty Ann, you provided some background information. I wasn't sure if those were intended for the executive summary or not, but and they may work themselves in someplace else. I was on Roman numeral 2, which was the board input into the new SEU contract. I'm just flying through some stuff right now. That was on page 4. I have some specific questions I would like to throw out to the board. I also think that the section should move. I think we should talk about the existing contract and how it was met or not met, and then discuss the new contract. But that's just a cosmetic issue. Section 3 is DOEE. You were going to provide us with summaries of the board's activities in 2016. So we welcome DOEE's the provision of its materials. Roman 4 was the status of the board's prior recommendations, meaning 2015, 2014. And I don't see that we put anything in on that, and maybe we're just going to scrap it. It's already 40 pages, but I leave that for people to decide if we really want to still come back to the recommendations that may or may not have been incorporated. I'm bored with them. I don't know about anything else. But
Has this been assigned to a specific individual?
well, I think it was Sandra, but I think Sandra did a whole lot in 5, so I'm not sure that that's...
Were we supposed to do 4? I thought it was 5. 5.
I originally had you for 4, which could have been inaccurate too. So it was just meaning that we had a lot of recommendations, and one of them had Ted and Lance on it with regard to reporting on revenues from the PJM market. 4 also had a recommendation about community engagement, actually, and that was something that Kirsten was on. And we can talk about, and it's what we've been talking about now. So it may be trimmer, so I think, I do think we wanna speak a little to the issue of the community engagement like we've just had this discussion. I think the issue of how the SEU did in generating revenue is covered in Roman 5. So maybe we just hit some high points for Roman 4. Roman 5 is done, is included. Thank you, Sandra and the team that put all that together. And then 6 was the conclusion, and we don't have anybody on that.
So Vicky, just to clarify quickly, did you want the paragraph that Ted and I put together to go into 4, or you want to just put it into section 5?
Well, I think it's already in section 5.
That's where it was put.
I believe so, wasn't it? Was there a discussion? I can't remember now.
If Dawn is portion.
Yeah, so I don't think we need that anymore.
Okay.
You could probably just roll or do a search for PJM, or I can call it out when we get there, when we leaf through. So don't worry about the PJM piece anymore. Let's just highlight if there are any outstanding old recommendations. The old recommendations used to be things like fill vacancies. They used to be about, what do we do about fuel switching? They used to be, what about that outreach that the board was going to do, which we just discussed. So let's, do some of that. But I think that's probably sufficient
enough.
Right. Yeah. So maybe then I will just take the liberty, since Roman 2 comes up early, of asking a couple of questions. One was, could somebody just do me the favor of resending me the current contract? Okay. I know it's somewhere, but there's so much, and I have not, unfortunately, organized all of my employees. So. Maybe, is it in a Dropbox? I still don't know how to access it.
It is in the Dropbox, but we can resend it to you. Just it's on top of your mailbox.
I'm still 55, and I still don't know how to get into Dropbox, and I still can't take the time to learn. Okay, that'd be helpful for me. One question I had was, I highlighted this on page 8. Go there, please, Graham. And it was in bright green, or dark green on my version. Thanks. Okay, so right there I had green. There had been a statement by BGA that cost of, or regarding the removal of the cost effective requirement from benchmark 2, having to do with increasing renewable energy generation. It used to be a cost effective requirement, and now it's not. And I recall dialogue that cost effective was not an apt test, but it would be replaced by better measures. But I don't remember or know or understand what the better measures are.
Installation capacity. They have to install a certain amount of solar every year.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And where is that specified? Or is there a quantifiable?
It's 1 megawatt per year.
Yeah, it's in the contract on the renewable energy.
There's a table in the contract.
Okay, thank you. That ties a lot together for me. Thank you very much. Just 3 lines below that in text, and we just talked about this now. No, please go back up. Just under Roman Arabic 3, the prior contract focused on residences, which meant that achieved. Nope, right where you were. Right there. Yep. Good.
No, that's not true. That's not accurate. It didn't focus. It was also multifamily. If you mean residences as, it depends what you mean by residence.
That's just my text here, Sandra. That's my mistake then. I was just trying to not use the word residential, but I mean, was that a BDA thing? The prior residences includes multifamily, doesn't it? People who live in places. But if there's a better term, I'm happy to use it. My issue was that we have said, and we talked about this here, the prior contracts focus on where people live meant that the benchmark wasn't reflecting gains that could be achieved other than where low-income people live. But I don't know that I've heard with specificity where some of those other gains could be seen. And just now we talked about are they seen in shelters, public housing, and then that was where, so I just wanted to confirm what those were, because then later in Sandra's section 5, I think there's some tension or criticism with how far we're going, and so I think we need help
I
reconciling.
can answer that. The benchmark was changed, so the new low-income benchmarks includes shelters, clinics, and I think look for the language, and so it does
Lot of
That's
buildings.
changed in the last,
several years ago.
It would change about, I would say, in FY15. We implemented in FY16. This came directly from a change to the CAA, to the Affordable Energy Act, that reduced the benchmarks down to 4 benchmarks. And it specifically
but this is
spelled
the
out.
first time, this is the first year, or last year was, no,
No,
it's been done.
it was amended in the prior contract as well.
No.
Yeah,
It was actually
FY16,
implemented.
which this report is based on, would have been the first year in which the benchmark was expanded to include low-income clinics and shelters and other buildings serving low-income residents.
Well, some of the issues that we had was, what was the methodology in terms of determining which shelters would be chosen, where are they, specifically with respect to the hospitals, are the patients low-income patients, what are the guidelines, or could that go to Sibley? Or could it
We
go-
haven't put hospitals in the definition, but within the contract of itself,
clinics, right?
yeah, we define the type of clinics that we would be accepting and the type of shelters that we would be accepting. That's clearly defined in the contract.
The new contract.
Yes.
No, even when we did the first in FY16, that definition was spelled out of what clinics and shelters would be
Shelters we
acceptable.
use.
Yeah.
Because that's the type of information that's helpful, even to the public, certainly for me, and I missed it, but, for the public to know
Okay.
what those are.
Yes.
So what we can send you, again, resend a copy of the 60 of the previous contract that has that definition.
That's great, thank you. On the next page, please, on 9, I had a question. You could just scroll down to where I think I have yellow highlighting, yeah. To refresh my memory, I pulled out our Survey Monkey and I had to ask my IT folks to help me search all my emails for Survey Monkey. I felt good about that. Yeah. And our number 1 recommendation was with regard to leaving the spend level on low income the same as it had been in the prior contract, which was 30%. And was that I don't remember or know if that was the result.
No, we reduced it 20%.
And
Reduced
added
it to
this-
20% and added
the
this
savings
10% saving. Okay, then I remember our recommendation was that we needed to have a cogent explanation for people to understand what we meant by that. And I wonder if we ever provided an explanation anywhere to people to explain that.
In terms of at a board meeting.
Publicly available explanation. Okay. My next question was under number 6, this is historic, right there. So we had converted 2 of the benchmarks were converted from benchmarks to tracking. Why was the growth in energy demand of largest users converted to a tracking?
Again, it was a little change in the law. The law reduced it from 6 benchmarks to 4, and largest energy users and peak demand were changed to tracking those again.
I'm sorry.
Largest energy users and peak demand.
Right. But why was that changed?
In the law?
Yes.
I can certainly offer some explanations, not sure what the council member took into consideration when they changed it. But in order for the DCSU to hit any of their targets, especially the savings targets, they have to work with the largest energy users in the city. So this benchmark was already being captured in the overall energy savings goal that was specified at the 1% level for electricity and 1% level for natural gas.
Okay.
This was just a means of simply counting the number of large users that were served in that
Okay.
process.
Okay. Thank you.
And the main difference is now there is no incentive tied to those two tracking.
Right. Okay. Okay. And then if you could scroll please to page 10, I have what I threw out there as recommendations regarding benchmarks, and those were some of the things I just made up based upon things that we've said over time. So I would encourage everybody in the board to please think about recommendations. And then I also see there may be some overlap already with what Sandra's section has for recommendations on specific. So that's that section. 3, we're awaiting. 4, we're going to focus on Kirsten's section on outreach by the board. And 5 is Sandra's section. So Sandra, is there anything you want to go over in your section?
Okay, go to my section. As Vicki mentioned, we did look at, well, first, a couple of things. One, we looked at the ACEEE report and noted that there was it went down a couple of points. Again, not being defensive, but looking at exactly what was the focus, and that was the energy efficiency issues. And so the recommendation is to continue to work on that. I mean, it's not a substantive change, but to continue to work on that, and we anticipate that the other issues, the solar for all, that's renewables, will help to increase the level that, the rating that we get prospectively. If you go up, let's see.
Up or down?
Down. So let's wait, that's so far. And even the ACEEE, I mean, their point was that, that the energy efficiency gains that are likely to happen would increase the level of output, in the upcoming period.
So the statement here regarding the expanding the scope of the benchmark, are you suggesting that we should narrow it back to what it was, just specifically dealing with low-income residents and not going after the clinics and the shelters?
I wanted more information on that. That was the issue. I had no sense of, how they were selected, what the savings were, how, whether or not we were achieving the goals. It was just very, very, generic. I think that it warrants discussion. Are we actually hitting the target level? Are we hitting low-income residents? Now, the shelters, you assume that, yes, just by definition, they are low income. They don't have residences. So that is probably beneficial. But I just felt that I didn't have enough information to make the determination as to whether or not that would go far in allowing the SCU to meet that target. So no, I'm not saying right now we need to change it, but we need to understand, how it fits into the larger process.
And I think it's on the continuum, it picks up with the comment I was making earlier, like when the goal was to realize savings in places other than where people live, and part of what drove that conversion also, as I recall, was because focusing efforts on residences that may not be owned by low-income people means that people who are benefiting may be owners who may not be low income. I mean, owners of multifamily dwellings or what have you, or whatever, the landlords. So we changed it, but now I think what Sandra is saying is like, but we don't really understand how an implementation for reaching the low income customers.
Yeah.
It would be helpful to have, as I said before, a list of where these facilities are located, which clinics are being serviced.
Yeah, and I think so far we have about 56 clinics on the list that fit the definition that we have. And just, anecdotally, we have been discussing this issue with the DCSCU as it relates to this particular benchmark, because given the current demographics and the way housing stock is going in the district, the stock of low-income housing is on a continuous decline, which makes it harder to specifically just go after low-income from the standpoint of doing residences, whether we're talking single-family homes or even multifamily buildings. The way we define multifamily buildings, it needs to be at least 66% if it's less than 200 units in the building, you need 66% of it to be eligible. If it's over 200 units, it's 50%. And it's extremely difficult to find a building in the city right now that has 50% of the occupants being low income. Hence, one of the reasons why this benchmark was expanded, to make sure that we're addressing places like shelters and clinics where primarily low income people are served through those places.
One of the concerns would be that, my concerns would be to ensure that in moving toward the shelters and the clinics, that we don't miss opportunities to serve the target class, which are the low income, residents, because you will probably be able to meet that benchmark with the new facilities, but then there's not that emphasis on the direct improvements for residential, because low income residential concerns.
I agree.
So,
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, this is Betty Ann. Two things I'm aware of this. Going back to A, there is a lot of concern within the regulatory community and among the energy offices about how those ratings are done and what they do and don't take into account in terms of the specific policies, laws, et cetera, of the various states. Both, I know I'm NACRA, Mid-Atlantic Utility Commissioners, and the Mid-Atlantic chapter of the Association of Energy Officials, that the DOE is part of, are both taking up, we took up at our meeting last week, and I think Nadia was this week or last week too, taking up a proposal to call them out on how they do the ratings for the states and why the states, they're a little moving up and down by a couple of points, not having a lot of confidence that they are doing anything other than a one-size-fits-all. So I wouldn't get too upset about us moving around in those and use it for, any significant. Obviously, it's something to look at, but it's not something we have a lot of faith in.
Well, conversely, then, should we be pointing to it, or I guess now it's passed. And there's the city one too, where I think the alleged drop was more significant than the state one. It wasn't like from number 3 to number 8 in the city.
Well, we rose in states.
Marshall's an expert on this stuff.
Yeah, we rose.
Yeah, one of my responsibilities is providing the data to ACEEE for their ranking. And the key thing, we did rise slightly in the states, we did fall in the cities, but the key thing that is it's a relative ranking, obviously. And if you look at what we were 3 and now we're 8, if you look at the cities that comprise numbers 3 through 7, it's not that we have fallen, it's that they have risen. We were one of the absolute leaders, and now cities like Chicago and LA and Austin and Seattle have done many of the things that we were leading on and caught up with us. So that's...
So now we need to get even
further
ahead.
exactly,
I
but
mean,
it
that
doesn't.
goes back
So
to
it which is what ACEEE is about. ACEEE is an advocacy organization. They do these rankings with specific intent, which is to motivate action. It's not in their interest to just try to make people, pat people on the back for doing well, even though I would love to be patted on the back.
Well, DC was patted on the back when I think Cambridge was.
Yes, that's
And we still have more Energy Star buildings than any other region in the country.
Lots of pats on
We
the back.
passed LA,
Yeah.
and we've kept our lead.
not a metric that ACEEE looks at, sadly.
All right.
And as we said, that I acknowledge that it's not, when you're looking at the other jurisdictions, it's not an apples to apples comparison.
Absolutely.
So that is a given, but at the same time, it provides guidance as to, what can possibly be achieved. And that's the way we should look at it.
Right. And Marshall, correct me if I'm a little bit off base here, but the discussion in the last rankings of the cities and why we may have fallen a little bit revolved around the specific technology of combined heat and power.
It was one element.
Yeah, I mean, so.
That was an element.
Yeah.
I think CHP counts for both. It counts for more in the state ranking, but it's definitely an element. But in the city one, they've also somewhat broadened the CHP definition to look at what we're doing on microgrids, because that's important. And then we're doing some more around.
Right.
So a according to the documentation that we had, the district's total score was 24.5 out of 50 points. Is that correct? And it was different components of that. And what was the largest drop? Because I thought there was one category that really resulted in the downgrade, or whatever you want to call it. No?
I think I'd have to go back and check the numbers. On the state one.
Yeah, but our ranking was better in the states. We went up.
In some instances, right?
The overall.
The overall ranking.
Okay. Well, that, that's one of the guidelines that we would like to look at to keep the focus in terms of where we fit in the general national scheme.
Good.
And that goes generally to, meeting the minimum but not necessarily the maximum.
Can I ask about those minimum and maximum targets? Those were in the city paper article made by contract modifications. And I think that was one of the items I pointed out, Sandra, I think you were asking about earlier this morning. That contract modification question, I wasn't on the board at the time. What is the procedure with regard to contract modifications and board involvement? Is there a procedure?
The general procedure for contract modification is mutual agreement between DOE and the DCSE on making tweaks to anything in the contract, from benchmarks to contract terms. We would sit down and work with the DCSE and come to an agreement. As far as the benchmarks are concerned, the board worked with a private consultant to establish the initial benchmarks.
I mean, the contract modification to have a minimum and maximum.
Yeah, we use the word minimum and maximum in an amendment, but it was always there in the original contract. They didn't specify the word minimum or maximum, but they specified a point at which performance kicked in, which we viewed as the minimum performance level. And then there is a cap on the expectation in terms of the 1%. So that would be the maximum amount. So the terms, yes, DOE came up with the word minimum and maximum, but it was always spelled out in the contract. Because if you say that you're eligible for 50% of a benchmark, if you achieve 50% of the number of green jobs you're supposed to create, then that's a minimum mark at which performance kicked in. We just use the term minimum and maximum to clarify things.
Well, I think that's a big area that would benefit from people understanding.
Yeah, I agree.
Both of us were around at that time too, when those initial discussions started, and my memory isn't that clear. Always having been there, so that might be a good thing for us to
Look at, right, because it does get to be, confusing. When you say they met all of their benchmarks, and then you see language that says, well, they met the minimum but not the maximum.
Just to be clear, the new contract does explicitly use the
As
term
opposed to
minimum and maximum. Yeah.
Rather than
Terminology
just,
is used.
right.
Because I think you may recall, for the initial formulation, the board was very concerned about the all or nothing approach, wherein if the DCSE wasn't going to hit the actual goal, they would just give up and not even try. So that's when we established a mark at which they could still be able to achieve some amount of incentive or bonus as they work towards getting to the ultimate goal. So it was just that terminology was adopted over time.
But it is
Just a
subject to
question that I
change.
had as well. In 2016, and I guess I should know this, did they receive any type of an incentive or an award for performance?
Yes, they did. As a result of the Tetra Tech report that the board was privy to the presentation, the SU was awarded around $590,000 in performance incentive, and we can certainly provide that calculation on how the benchmarks are determined. I know it's spelled out in writing in the contract, but the math is not always straightforward for some folks, so we're can gladly
That was
provide that
helpful,
analysis.
like,
And that would reflect where they met the maximum or the highest level in order to qualify for the incentive, for 1% incentive.
Exactly. Well, not 1% incentive, the total at risk. For example, the green jobs benchmark. They achieved 104 jobs, I believe, and the requirement was 88. So it's a no-brainer that 100% of that incentive would be paid. And then everything else is on a sliding scale. The low-income benchmark, they hit about 98% of the target, so it's barely a couple of dollars that was remaining on the for that incentive. And the most involved ones are the gas and the electric benchmarks on how you do the sliding scale, because there's a minimum mark at which you get half of the money, and then everything else is prorated on a sliding scale for every megawatt hour or every MMBTU saving they achieve after that minimum.
So the total amount on the table was 680,000, and they got 590 of the 680 for the bonus.
Can I, this is Sean Scully, can I ask a question on that too? If they don't meet a minimum of one of the benchmarks, then do they not get a payout at all, or is it like
Yes, that's
scale
correct.
as well?
Yes.
Well, yes, not just don't pay out, but they also face the possibility of being penalized by the district. Some of you may recall, I believe it was in fiscal year 2013, we penalized the DCSU for not getting the required amount of green jobs. So when the penalty is assessed, the way the penalties work, we kind of offset that against any performance incentive we would have had to pay. So that way the city is kind of made whole for
But
yes,
I
you're not
thought
hitting
the
the
question
targets.
was, do they get anything? So they would, if they don't meet one minimum benchmark, does that cancel all?
No, it does not. There is a electric and gas where you have to meet both to get an incentive, but the other ones are independent, so to speak.
So if and I think this goes back to just like the definition of the benchmark and the legislation in the last few years, and I'm not sure if someone was talking about changes in the legislation, but the one that I understand is for the low income benchmark is to improve energy efficiency in low income housing. But as we kind of were discussing before, that the evaluation by Tetra Tech seems to include renewables in this, and I'm trying to understand how that changed and how that may have helped DCFU meet its minimum goal, which, according to some of the numbers I look at, didn't even meet its minimum goal in 2015, though it states it did. And it's including things like, as we kind of said, the lighting program for shelter or food bank, which is a noble thing to concentrate on, but that is something that usually falls under a different program like custom commercial program, because it's not directly influencing the bills of low income residents. So, you know, this is an area that I think that is a concern, because it looks like the numbers are being tweaked in order to achieve a goal, and at the expense of what the original intent of the law was.
Well, Sean, if I could,
comment on my interpretation of it, and I know that the SEU as well as COEE would have to give us context. So there was that change as it relates to those particular entities being able to be a part of this, and it was defined as such. Wouldn't say that it was done to actually assist them in meeting that particular goal, but it was structured in that way. And then as a result of it being structured in that way, then it can be counted as such, which allows them to meet the minimum performance target. However, I do understand that there may need to be some additional discussion or understanding around that, but I think as currently situated, it would have to be applied as such, because that's how it was defined within the context of 2016.
Yeah, and if I can expand further on that, when the law was changed to expand the low-income definition to include renewable energy and not just energy efficiency, it was specifically because, as previously stated, the SEU was spending roughly about $4 to $5 million solely on doing energy efficiency. And if they did renewables for low-income folks, there were no credit being assigned for that spending. So they were actually having to go above and beyond if they wanted to provide solar to low-income folks. So when the law was changed to expand the definition to include energy efficiency and renewable energy, hence the reason why Tetra Tech included spending on renewable energy as part of this low-income benchmark. And when we do lighting and so forth, lighting is an energy efficiency measure as defined by the contract and as defined by the industry in terms of how we do energy efficiency. Yes, most of these buildings that the SEU go into, especially on a multifamily basis, lighting is the primary measure that they're going to do because the other bigger measures are usually cost prohibitive, like trying to do a boiler replacement, or even in some instances, if you wanted to do a complete insulation in the walls or even some type of ceiling insulation that's being done. So the way it is specified in the law and in the contract is what Tetra Tech used to do their analysis. That is why for the first time you're seeing renewable spending being counted towards the SEU attainment of that spend target. In previous years, it was deducted because renewables wasn't a part of the definition of the low-income benchmark.
When was the amendment to the law passed?
Again, I think the CA was amended in FY15. This took into effect in a contract in FY16. So the performance that you're looking at right now would clearly include renewables in that spending.
Okay, so when I look at the Tetra Tech report, they do include renewables in the calculation for 2015. So and it's a lot. It's close to close to $2 million. So that's what I'm trying to understand is when that took effect. And if anybody has a copy of that,
yeah, I can explain why that was counted there in 2015. Because again, in 2015, the DCSU did do some low-income spending in partnership with the first low-income solar program that we piloted for the district. And it was an agreement between the agency and the DCSU, and as in the contract, that the dollars that are being spent on these low-income homes would be counted towards the low-income benchmark. Because it was the first time the SEU were literally taking SETF dollars and dedicating it for low-income solar. So it would be, again, in our opinion, a kind of unfair practice to ask them to do solar for low-income folks, but not count that towards the spending, and still require 30% of the budget to be spent on energy efficiency. You'll be looking at roughly 7 to 8 million out of your 20 being spent on low-income folks. You will never hit those savings targets.
Can I also add something here to this discussion? And I'll send the ACEEE benchmarking of low-income energy efficiency programs out to the board. But right now, we're top 5 out of 51 cities that were benchmarked in terms of low-income energy, low-income gas savings per customer. And so I think that's important as we talk about how we improve performance because like I said, we're already up there in that upper echelon, and I think in terms of how the benefits get to the residents, we can always improve there. But in terms of our performance over the past couple of years, it actually is pretty good.
So was that more gas though than electric?
Yes, yeah.
And for the electric, where are we in terms of the electric?
Good question. I mean, this report just came out July 21st of this year, so we can distribute it.
It has the top 5 and the bottom 5. Three words in the bottom.
Right. And we never wanted it.
Yeah.
That's important.
Were there other questions, Sandra, for your section?
Not right now. Avery, do you have any questions?
No, I think if we can get that list, just so we can see what shelters and clinics were qualified, that'd be very helpful in how you quantify that. That would be very helpful for us.
Certainly.
And I think for the heck of it, if somebody could point me to the right places to refresh my memory on the evolution of minimum and maximum, and now we're in high stretch, low stretch, or
But I think that
make it better.
I think that's good. That would be helpful. But I think that we should, sort of think about how we're going to redefine or address the minimum and maximum. Because I think it is an issue in terms of public understanding and even the board's understanding of how that rolls out.
Right, and I just wanted to comment on that as well. I wanted to add something into that section where it is appropriate for us, as we just indicated, to be able to explain the background as well as the rationale, so that just the leader would definitely have an understanding of that.
Agreed, yep. Some background section somewhere.
And Lance, you mentioned earlier the discussion, we had a discussion on the, how the SEU and Solar for All program will work together. I think that's important for the board to have a clear understanding of that, particularly since they will not be doing any direct installation for low-income consumers, direct PV installation for low-income residents.
Is this for
But
the
you're going
report?
to,
Is this for the report or something for the board going
for the
forward?
board going forward.
Yeah, because if you don't mind me jumping in, it's in context also with what we're doing with Green Bank, kind of being the hub and the platform, and then PACE as well, and then even bringing in our stormwater funds, that this all work together, and we kind of see the Green Bank is trying to be the one that puts all the package together. The question is, and I think going forward, the board should have this discussion with us, is the degree to which we incentivize the SEU to participate by how we let them credit the performance measures in multi-piece, packages.
Well, that's what, in our section, we talk about the impact and the effect of DPAs and the Green Bank and Solar for All. And it's important for the board to be involved to know what that relationship is going to be.
And the board may have some advice on the SEU part of how we should recognize their performance measures being partially achieved through that participation.
If they should, if and how.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I don't know, but that's a technical.
So yeah, we can certainly provide that clarity for you, Sandra.
I have the minimum maximum for me.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, thanks. I think we should go to Tommy's update.
Oh.
Are you going to circulate? You did circulate this too.
Yeah, I guess maybe the folks who were going to provide cards, if they would get those to me, and then I'll turn around another draft, and our next meeting on this is when?
We had to talk about it.
We hadn't specified that, and at this rate, I'm guessing this report might end up being 60 plus pages long. I was wondering if there's a specified page limit that the board is shooting for.
Well, I guess, I'm sorry, I was just going to say to that, and I did have a question of the drafting of why we were referencing 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, with the benchmarks, whether or not those were things that could be cut. I mean, just.
So is that the section that we have that information in the Sandra section?
Yes.
Yeah, there was a request, and that's why I pulled it to have the historical information as it relates to the SEU and meeting their particular benchmarks. That was the request that the board discussed, so I included that, and there needs to be a summary that just captures, and we could take out the table, so we could just put a summary as it relates to its evolution over that period of time since inception. But that was something the board did speak to including.
I think that that's important to include the historical development or evolution, but I do think it can be summarized. It's obviously.
Sure, yeah. And then we could stick those in appendices.
Right, I was going to say.
Yes,
exactly. So
and I think in addition to the summary, we could just simply attach the MNB report to this board report so that anyone who wants to go forward into understanding the performance benchmarks and how they were assessed and achieved, you can always review that report.
Okay, thank you. And this is Kirsten. I wanted to get in our earlier discussion also gave me some additional context, but I have the section about community engagement. And the minutes from September and the November meeting discussed possibly planning a community engagement forum or some type of public event, and I didn't know what occurred that the event didn't happen. I didn't see anything in the earlier notes from this year that this event was held. And if I'm mistaken, please correct me. But just wanted to get some additional context for that section as I write it, since I wasn't around and this is ongoing.
I'll volunteer to give you a call on it, not because I'm trying to prevent anybody from knowing anything, just because I think because we're going to run out of time, and because I think we've been talking about it for a really long time. So,
Okay, well,
you and I just trying to get in touch and figure out how to make sense of this, or whether it's fair to tag you with writing something up on it for the report. So, yes, I would be happy to turn around another draft. It's next week is the 24th. It depends when people get stuff to me, and I guess maybe we should shoot for another rendezvous the week of October 1st. Would that work for people?
October 2nd does not work for me, will not work for me. I don't know.
Maybe Lenora, might you send around a Google poll for the week of the October 1st? 2nd? Is that okay? Okay, thank you. Okay. Update?
Just very quickly, the Green Bank legislation is likely to be marked up in October, which means that to get through 2 readings and then a mayor's signature to put it in law, that will likely earliest be on January. Additionally, in terms of the REDF, as we announced, we put out $13.5 million in grants to private contractors, and we will be, we'll be putting out materials of what these are, but we're briefing stakeholders as requested to say what they're going to. But I also need to note that we're putting out funds to our local sister agencies, $5 million for Department of Housing, $1 million for DC Public Libraries, $1 million for UDC, $3.5 million to DGS to do ground mount, and then provide community solar at a local level. So those funds are moving. We still have the problem that we collect the funds in, we certify the funds by May, and to get the funds out the door, especially in multi-year type contracts, you're vulnerable to the council to saying, we're just going to take the money you haven't spent and use next year's money to fulfill your contracts or your grants. So these funds are still vulnerable to the council. The mayor has made good on her commitment not to do that, but I will say that these grants, $13.5 million, we just got them in place, and those funds are going to roll over into next year. The council may try to take those funds again and then say, use your next year's money to pay them. So we haven't completely figured this out yet, and frankly, the CFO has not been a lot of help with this. It's just an infirmity in how DC budget works. But not much more to say about that, but we can continue on the stakeholder level to say that we are trying to protect those funds. We're finishing the 2nd year in a row with money in LIHEAP. Not really money in LIHEAP, we're going to finish at 0, but usually we run out of money in June or July, and so the city administrator and the mayor has assured or have taken reprogrammed dollars each time to get us to the finish line. And so,
I was going to ask whether you're serving fewer residents.
Like you say, the shrinking demographic.
Just about the same, 20,000 between 20 and 22,000. So we are already at the 20,000 mark, and we've not, come to the end of the fiscal year as yet.
So, so that's new. Usually is, we run out.
So there's not fewer residents? Is it that there's more efficiency?
No, it means that the mayor and the city administrator have been identifying, they've made this a priority since we came into office. So they've been transferring funds through,
Those is funds that they're sweeping from somewhere else.
not the council, the mayor's funds. That at times if something's underspent or not spent during the fiscal year, not rolling into the next year, during the year, that it's been one of the highest priorities of the city to say, let's yes, money left over, put it in lighting. So we keep that in front of them monthly of where we are in our spend rate, and they've asked for that. So that's good news, and so that's the announcements.
Great. Thank you. Anything else? Old or new matter? Hearing none. Anything else? Adjourned?
Adjourned.
Adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thanks. Vicki, I'm gonna give you a call, talk about where I am on the work.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Bye. Thank you.
I don't think you need to say anything more about the merger. Yeah, but we're filing in the next couple of days. If there's nothing we said that is greater than what we're about to file.